Imagine being a historian 100 years from now trying to figure out what happened. Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Imagine being a historian 100 years from now trying to figure out what happened here. There are a lot of questions that are going to puzzle you, but one of the most baffling will be, how did Joe Biden get the Democratic nomination in 2020? 2020 was the year, you will remember, when we learned that white people are bad and systemic racism is responsible for everything that has gone wrong in the world. And yet, 2020 was also the year the Democrats nominated, by their free choice, an elderly white man from a slave state who'd once eulogized a Klan recruiter. So the anti-white party picked the white guy. How did that happen? Well, it's pretty simple. Democrats care about power, and power derives from winning. When you lose, you don't have power. And Bernie Sanders couldn't win. Sanders terrified the donor class. So Democrats went with Joe Biden, who loves the donor class and is loved by them. And from a fundraising perspective, that turned out to be a wise choice. By the end of that cycle, Democrats had spent a total of $8.4 billion. That includes $400 million just from Mark Zuckerberg. And that total does not even include the tens of billions in free media coverage, as slick and dishonest as any paid ad, but that, unlike paid ads, is not regulated by campaign finance law. So if you add all of that up, the Democratic Party dropped more in that presidential year than the entire annual GDP of most African countries, all to dislodge Donald Trump from the White House. Nothing like that has ever happened. Can they do it again? That's the question before us, and it's a tougher question this round. 2.5 years ago, many voters could tell themselves that Joe Biden might unite the country. Some mistook his dementia for moderation. But no one can make that mistake now. With the American economy in decline and the rest of the world in obvious chaos, Biden's going to have to come up with a whole new set of lies in order to keep his job, and that's not an easy thing. And that may explain why, as of mid-April 2023, where we are now, Joe Biden still has not formally announced his re-election campaign. He was asked about it this morning on NBC. Here he is, sounding less than all in.
Are you saying that you would be taking part in our upcoming election in 2024?
Well, I'll either be rolling an egg or being the guy who's pushing them out.
Come on, help a brother out. Make some news for me.
Well, I plan on running out, but we're not prepared to announce it yet.
He can barely speak the words. We're not prepared to announce it yet, he says with his eyes closed. Well, why aren't they announcing it? Well, you know why. He's going to be 82 by the next inauguration, and no one really other than his wife thinks that's a good idea, because it's not. So where does that leave Democrats? Well, if you're a rational person who took them at their word, you would assume the party, the Democratic Party, would replace Joe Biden with someone who embodies their highest values. You imagine a trans black woman with a background in corporate HR, or a Latinx drag queen with purple hair and lots of face piercings, or maybe even Kamala Harris. But no, in fact, no chance. That would be principled, and therefore they will never do it. Nominating someone you say you support? No. When Biden leaves, or more likely is shoved aside, they're going to nominate another straight white man who loves the big banks. Someone even oilier and faker than Joe Biden. Why would they do that? Because it worked last time. And we're guessing, if we had to bet tonight, it's going to be Gavin Newsom. We can't say that for certain, but we have noticed Gavin Newsom was at the White House not long ago when Joe Biden wasn't, just kind of measuring the curtains. And then over the weekend we saw this, Gavin Newsom sitting down with the Democratic Party's former spokeswoman, now in residence at MSNBC, Jen Psaki. Psaki didn't conduct really an interview. She's not a journalist. She gave Newsom instead a chance to outline his platform for when he takes complete control. So don't dismiss him. You may be in the habit of dismissing Gavin Newsom. Pay close attention as he gives his pitch on MSNBC.
You know, I just finished 18 events in 5 days in California. I've sacrificed my heart and soul for my state, and I take a backseat to no one on that. So I get it. But I also don't get what's going on in this country. I don't get why everybody's not doing what we're doing. All the progress the last half century is being rolled back in these states in real time in just the last few years. I don't think people fully understand the rights regression, individual liberties, on civil rights, on voting rights, on the gerrymandering that's happening out here.
Well, I mean, is your brain exploding? If you're a literal person, maybe so. This is the guy who forced every one of his 40 million residents in his state to get an experimental vaccine, whether they wanted to or not, lecturing you about individual rights and civil liberties. Quote, I don't get why everyone isn't doing what we're doing in California, he says. Maybe because it's not working? Because the people who live in your state who can afford to leave have? More people have left California this year than any state in the country. California, the largest net emigration in the United States. They actually ran out of U-Hauls. It was that bad. So you have a mixture of billionaires and desperately poor people who are dependent upon the state. Kind of like Latin America. That's exactly the economic structure, increasingly, of the state of California. It's not a place of promise, and you know that because middle-class people with families aren't moving there. That's how you know. Is your state doing the right thing? Well, people who haven't made it but would like to would be moving there, not fleeing from tyranny in other countries or desperate poverty in Central America, but from other parts of America. Are they moving there? No, they're not. Where are they going? Well, actually, they're going to Florida. That's not a political point. It's just true, and it's measurable. So you'd think if you were a normal person and you were running California, you'd think, what are they doing in Florida that we should be doing? No, not Gavin Newsom. And this is the key to his appeal to Democratic leaders. Like Joe Biden, he will literally say anything, and then he'll take it to 11 and lecture the person who's doing a better job than he is on how he's a bad person. Watch Newsom tell the governor of Florida how to run a state.
There was a pretty startling split screen. You had 1,000 kids in Nashville out there protesting the lack of action on gun reform measures. Well, you had Governor DeSantis signing a bill on permitless carry behind closed doors.
Yeah,
what did you make of that?
Scared to death.
Who is he scared of?
Scared of the people. Scared of the
people
public.
in Florida?
Yeah, that overwhelmingly oppose that position. I think the majority of NRA members, probably oppose that position.
This is what happens when everything about you, from your physical features to your very soul, has been altered by cosmetic surgery. Just like Joe Biden, but younger. You'll say literally anything. Words have no connection to reality. There's no expectation that you're describing something real. You're merely using words as a tool to gain power. That's terrifying. It's dishonest to its core. So you just heard Gavin Newsom say that only leaders who are, quote, scared of the people let the people carry firearms. They're so scared of the people, they let them defend themselves. By contrast, when you're a completely legitimate leader presiding over a system that's not rigged, you start confiscating guns. You live in a state where only the governor's bodyguards can be armed. It's like, what you're seeing here is not just the triumph of packaging over reality, but the triumph of dishonesty over truth. That's so dishonest that he's not even trying to convince you. He's trying to reshape reality itself. By the way, why wouldn't he? If men can become women, then why wouldn't everything Gavin Newsom says be true just because he said it? So what's the effect on the actual state, our largest state, the prettiest state, what was for decades the economic engine of the United States, California? What has been the effect of Gavin Newsom's leadership on that state? Well, this has been well chronicled. Newsom's been the governor of California, beat a recall recently, since 2019 for 4 years. Before that, he ran San Francisco, where he's from. So how's San Francisco doing? Under good leadership, San Francisco would be thriving. But under Gavin Newsom's leadership, well, here's what's happening in San Francisco.
Friends identify the victim as Don Carmignani, a former San Francisco fire commissioner. He suffered a fractured skull, broken jaw, and lots of lacerations to his face and head. Carmignani showed up to his mother's place after they refused to move. Soon they picked up and put down near the corner laundromat. Carmignani confronted them, and that, they say, is what provoked the brutal beating. The crime angering and traumatizing those who heard or saw it all unfold.
I moved here because I love this city, and it's becoming more and more disturbing to live here.
Yeah, they just closed today, actually, a Whole Foods in downtown San Francisco. Not a mom and pop place, a Whole Foods. A well-backed, in fact, owned by Amazon company, biggest company in the world, owns the grocery store, and they still had to close it. A grocery store that caters to rich people in one of the richest cities in the world, and they had to close it because why? Because the people who worked there were too afraid for their own physical safety to show up for work. So that's what's happening in San Francisco. And by the way, last week, Bob Lee, the founder of Cash App, was murdered, stabbed to death on the street, and what they tell us is one of the nicest parts of San Francisco. And then apparently, according to surveillance video, the guy who murdered him, randomly, just murdered him on principle, I guess, walked down the street completely at ease, pulling a rolling bag behind him because he has nothing to fear because there are no cops. This is a state in which crime has been legalized, and the only crimes are now thought crimes. If you disagree with the people in charge, then you're in serious trouble. But if you hurt others or steal, you're fine. You're part of a protected class. That's the definition of tyranny. And there are still some people in California who understand that. Here's one sheriff in Riverside County.
In the last 10 years, criminals have become increasingly more violent and brazen. What we are seeing in response to these very lax laws on crime, the push to decriminalize everything, the push to lessen the penalty for something or even take away the penalty for crime, is basically emboldening criminals to do more. It's really horrifying for law enforcement, and it's horrifying for the public that has to deal with it.
So here's our guess. We don't know the guy, but we would bet money that the second that man is vested in his pension, in other words, the second he can leave, he'll be in Idaho or Arizona or anywhere other than that state, because you can't live in a state like that unless you're rich, of course. So if you cared about the state of California, you would do something about this. But Gavin Newsom has completely ignored the condition of his state physically, it's now filthy, or the lives of the people who live there. Instead, he's doing what they all do, which is doubling down on identity politics. Pandering to people on the basis of their skin color or their sexual orientation or whatever. And because ultimately he is a stiff, robotic lizard man, he's doing it in the most awkward possible way. Here he is, April 5th, at the New College of Florida, because he is running for president, trying his best to seem interested as he claps along to an ethnic song and dance.
He's got me and you, sister, in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. Let me hear.
So, you want to know if he's running for president? Well, he flew to Florida to degrade himself on camera. And self-abasement is the #1 requirement of politics. You have to be willing to leave your dignity at the door. And for Gavin Newsom, that's easy. So if your first reaction to that is to recoil in revulsion and turn off your television set, then you're the threat to democracy. Normal people are the threat to democracy. Newsom's campaign ad, and this is the first of his presidential campaign ads, we predict, makes that perfectly clear. Watch.
We can't solve a problem without first identifying it. And the problem in our country right now? Authoritarian leaders who are so hell-bent on gaining power and keeping it by whatever means necessary that they're directly attacking our freedoms in state after state. That's why I'm launching the Campaign for Democracy. We're going on the road to take the fight to states where freedom is most under attack, where Republican leaders ban books, criminalize doctors, fire teachers, intimidate librarians, kidnap migrants, target trans kids, stoke racism, condone anti-Semitism, force the victims of rape and incest to carry their attacker's baby, where they ignore the will of the people. They make it harder to vote and easier to buy assault weapons. We'll help lead the fight to make sure we elect leaders in 2024 who believe in democracy.
Oh, the huevos on that man. You got to give him credit. Everything in that ad is not only untrue, it is the mirror image of the truth. It is the exact opposite of the truth. And it's therefore not just misleading, it is evil. This is not a question of we disagree on something. This is a fact of someone flipping around the truth and inverting it. If you're opposed to men in dresses twerking in front of kids, you're intimidating librarians. If you pause before you say castrate children, you're targeting trans kids. And of course, if you're not with his program, you don't believe in democracy. You're promoting authoritarianism. This is the man who's governor of a state in which there really is no democracy, in which all the candidates and the election outcomes are chosen by the unions, which are in bed with the Democratic Party. It's a one-party state. And the man who presides over a one-party state is lecturing you about democracy? Right. This is the guy who shut down the state of California and all of its schools for all the poor people, while he sent his children to in-person private schools and went to dinner at the most expensive restaurant in the United States. Meanwhile, anyone who didn't get his creepy shot, he compared to a criminal, to a drunk driver. Watch.
And with all due respect, you don't have the choice to go out and drink and drive and put everybody else's lives at risk. That's the equivalent of this moment with the deadliness and efficiency of the Delta virus.
So that turned out to be completely untrue, completely provably untrue as a matter of science. And again, the literal among us are driven crazy by watching a videotape like that. But Gavin Newsom is not driven crazy. It doesn't bother him at all. He's never apologized. He's never revised what he said before. He just kept going. This is a man who will say anything. And people who will say anything tend to be willing to do anything. And like Joe Biden, he has consistently run as a moderate and falsely. Back in 2008, as mayor of San Francisco, he promised to eliminate homelessness within the city within 10 years. That, of course, didn't work out. He's never apologized for that. In fact, homelessness has grown by double digits under his stewardship of the state. But if you want to understand who Gavin Newsom really is, if you want to appreciate not just the dishonesty, but the deep malice at the core of him, the desire to hurt other people, and the indifference to human suffering that has been the hallmark of his governorship, watch this clip from 2020 on Sobriety.
Clean and sober is one of the biggest damn mistakes this country's ever made. I know it's a hold your hand idealistic point of view that somehow magically, I mean, God bless some of you. If you're like me, I've been known to have a glass of wine at night watching some of the nightly news. We all need to self-medicate periodically.
We all need to self-medicate periodically. Well, now we have a country in which virtually everyone is self-medicating all the time, very often with the help of doctors. And nowhere is it worse than the state of California. If you cared about the people who lived in the state of California, you would notice this. Nearly 30,000 Californians die every single year from drugs and alcohol. That's the most of any state. To put it in perspective, that is close to 10 times as many people who die every year from gunfire. And of course, addiction is the central driver of homelessness, which has not only made the state ugly and dangerous and unlivable, but has also destroyed the lives of the people who are living on the streets. What about them? Gavin Newsom doesn't care. Quote, clean and sober is one of the biggest damn mistakes this country ever made. Really? If you're willing to say that, if you care so little about the people who live in your state that you will mock their sobriety, then you're definitely running for president. But before that happens, we thought we would check in on someone who has spent his life in the state and has seen it change longitudinally over more than 50 years. Adam Carolla is our friend. He joins us tonight to respond to a potential Gavin Newsom presidential run. Adam, he's your governor. What do you think of this?
All right. I could barely watch that without crawling out of my skin or not being clean and sober. Okay, couple things. He came on my podcast 9 years ago, and he told me his number one issue was homeless and homelessness. That was his number one issue. I said to him, the homeless population, this is 10 years ago, is comprised of drug addicts and people with mental disabilities and or both. He then said to me, sitting 3 feet across from me, but what about the true face of homelessness, which is a mother of 3 who has a full-time minimum wage job whose husband left her. So that was his idea of solving a problem, and he declared himself the number one issue is homelessness, and that's what he thought homeless was in California. Of course, it's grown exponentially, and no one has ever seen a mother of 3 with a full-time job out on the street. He's a sociopathic buffoon, but the scary part is people vote for him. It's really you and I. We don't need to solve the riddle of Gavin Newsom. He's a carpetbagger. He's an idiot. He's bought and sold. He's a sociopath. He puts Brill cream on his teeth. Fine. Why do people vote for him? That's the real question that we need to solve.
Well, that's the threat to democracy right there. If you have a population, it's a brand new population, a huge percentage of Californians just got there from other countries. If you have a population that votes for a leader that makes things worse, that is the challenge to democracy, and make things worse measurably, economically, in crime. I mean, like, that's a huge problem, a scary problem.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. The great Carroll Shelby, the man who made the Shelby Cobra, left Texas in the 60s to come to California to build cars. Could you imagine leaving Texas and coming to California to manufacture something in 2023? Also, here's a thought experiment that I think would work. Do you think if a number of Joe Biden's aides said to him, you can't run for president, we're already in our second term, do you think he would believe them?
Okay, that's good. What? I don't run into Biden too often, but if I ever see him, I'm going to say that. You know, the Constitution just won't allow it, sir. I'm sorry. Adam Carolla.
Goodbye.
That is hilarious. Performing in New York in May. Good luck there. Great to see you tonight.
Thank you.
We're going to South Florida tomorrow to Mar-a-Lago to interview Donald Trump, who is the front runner in the race for the Republican nomination. His lead has grown, by the way, since he was indicted. This will be the first time he has spoken publicly with the media since his arraignment. That'll air right here tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Eastern. Well, a gunman murdered several people at a bank in downtown Louisville today. The question is who did it and why, and as usually authorities don't want to tell us, which is usually a sign there's a story there. We're going to tell you everything that we have learned today after the break. This morning, as you may have read, a gunman murdered several people at a bank in Louisville, Kentucky. We're learning much more about the man who did it tonight. Fox's Trace Gallagher has that story for us. Hey, Trace.
Hey, Tucker. Police say this is a targeted attack, and the social media footprint of the shooter is providing a wealth of information, and not just because 25-year-old Connor Sturgeon, who was fired by the bank, was live streaming the attack on Instagram, but also because he indicated the attack was coming, posting messages where he said they won't listen to words or protests. Let's see if they hear this. There are also reports he left messages for friends and family saying that he was going to shoot at the bank, and even reportedly posted group chat messages where he said, I could burn the whole place down. Sturgeon had no criminal history. His LinkedIn page uses the pronouns he, him, and the Daily Beast reports that in college he supported Black Lives Matter and did not support former President Trump. He also wrote about his low self-esteem and emotional struggles. Interesting that his former high school basketball teammates noted that Sturgeon suffered so many concussions in high school that he wore a helmet to play high school basketball. Police say Sturgeon killed 4, injured 9 others, including 2 police officers. One officer was only grazed. The other remains in critical condition. Tucker.
Trace Gallagher for us tonight. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Has this kicked off a national conversation about the effect of pharmaceuticals on mass shootings? Is anyone talking about that? Can we get a talk screen, possibly? Are we allowed to ask that? Or does Pfizer not want us to? We're going to take that up at future opportunities. But first to the case of Daniel Perry in Texas. Perry's an Army sergeant who was driving for Uber in Austin during the 2020 Black Lives Matter riots. A mob surrounded his car in the middle of the street. And we know this because parts of what happened next are captured on video. One rioter closed in and raised his AK-47 in Perry's direction. Perry responded to the threat to his life, shot and killed the man in self-defense. The local DA, Soros-backed, charged Perry with murder for that, and last week Perry was convicted.
Daniel Perry's family in shock, crying over the fact that he had just been convicted of murder for killing protester Garrett Foster in 2020. Perry himself unable to hide his emotion, hugging his attorney as he cried.
State, is there a motion?
The state wasting no time.
Jury, I'm asking the defendant be remanded into custody at this point.
Perry was turned over into the custody of the Travis County Sheriff's Office, handcuffed instantly.
So you're not allowed to defend yourself against BLM rioters, even when they point a rifle at you. That's the lesson. But of course, that lesson is incompatible with justice. And so to his credit, the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, has announced that he will pardon Daniel Perry. It's a little more complicated in Texas. Perry is behind bars tonight, but the governor has instructed the Pardons Board to work on an expedited review. That's required by law in Texas in order for a pardon to occur. But he is pardoning this man. That is obviously the right thing to do. George Soros can't pay for people to put his political opponents in jail and then have a Republican governor ignore it. It's outrageous. But of course, Democrats think he should be convicted of murder because one of their voters got killed. Now, everyone involved in this was the same color, white. But of course, Greg Abbott is a racist for some reason for pardoning Perry. Watch this.
I understand what Abbott is doing. So much of this here, go back to Galveston, Texas, and you're going to find out what happened. Remember, it was in Texas that black folks were kept into slavery over 2 years after they had been freed.
This is what we're dealing with in this country. This is why you ended up having a Black Lives Matter protest in the first place. Seemingly, the Republicans do not believe in being hard on crime when it comes to certain folk, right? Seemingly, they only want to be hard on crime when they are poor, when they are black, when they are brown.
If Daniel Perry gets pardoned for murder in Texas, it'll really only be because he killed the right kind of person, the person that right-wingers don't care about. That is a Black Lives Matter protester.
But the guy who was shot was white. Like, this is insane. And by the way, Congressman Clyburn does not get the credit that he deserves for being completely dishonest, ignoble, and also totally corrupt. He was promoting his daughter for government jobs. So the Texas Pardons Board is now reviewing Daniel Perry's pardon. They're not watching MSNBC, we hope. But we wanted to speak to one of the few people who knows tonight what Daniel Perry is going through, sitting behind bars for defending himself. Kyle Rittenhouse lived that experience. He joins us tonight. Kyle Rittenhouse, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Tucker.
So here you have a guy, I don't think there's really any debate. The protester who was killed raised a rifle at him, is exactly what happened with you. How do you think Daniel Perry feels tonight sitting in jail?
I can only imagine. He's probably sitting there wondering what happened. He defended himself. He knows what he did was right. You have a man with an AK-47 and over 120 rounds of ammo on his person, dressed just for war, as some people might say, with the rifle strapped, the AK-47, raising it towards Daniel Perry, who is in flip-flops and beach shorts, carrying a revolver. And nobody wants to talk about that. Nobody wants to mention that he was armed. I see a lot of reports just saying he fired indiscriminately into a crowd and he drove into a bunch of rioters. They don't want to talk about how he was swarmed, how his car was swarmed with a bunch of rioters trying to attack him.
As he was driving for Uber, I mean, the least powerful person in our society, attacked by one of the worst people in our society who's out there rioting. As in your case, you were trying to defend a used car lot, and a convicted child molester tried to kill you, and they took the convicted child molester's side. Do you see parallels here
Absolutely, and you see the double standard in this case. People aren't talking about the fact of the second person who attacked Daniel Perry. After Sergeant Daniel Perry defended himself against Garrett Foster, he was then shot at 3 times by a person who was never charged by the Travis County DA. Somebody who recklessly fired a slew of shots at Daniel Perry's car. And they don't want to talk about that. They don't want to talk about the recklessness of that, and they don't want to charge him. It's a double standard, and it's not okay.
He fired 3 shots in the middle of a city, but that's totally fine. Okay. Kyle Rittenhouse, thank you for adding to our knowledge of this story. Appreciate it. So Bud Light announced that it hates its own customers, probably you, and just to make that perfectly clear, they rolled out a new ad celebrating men who dress up as women. But that's not going quite as well as Bud Light had hoped, thank heaven, and we've got details on it next. So it used to be like 5 years ago, the idea was you do your thing, we do our thing, we don't bother each other. That was called tolerance. You want to dress up like a woman, fine. Now the rules have changed completely. Worship me as I dress up like a woman, or I'll crush you. That's why suddenly everything, even beer cans, are celebrating and promoting transgenderism. Bud Light has just released a commemorative can celebrating a man who dresses up like a woman. His name is Dylan Mulvaney. Here's Alyssa Heinerscheid, who brags that she is the first female VP of Bud Light, telling us that Bud Light loves Dylan Mulvaney, but hates its own customers.
So I had this super clear mandate. It's like we need to evolve and elevate this incredibly iconic brand. What does evolve and elevate mean? It means inclusivity. It means shifting the tone. It means having a campaign that's truly inclusive and feels lighter and brighter and different and appeals to women and to men. And representation is at sort of the heart of evolution. You've got to see people who reflect you in the work. And we had this hangover. I mean, Bud Light had been kind of a brand of fratty, kind of out of touch humor. And it was really important that we had another approach.
Out of touch, fratty and out of touch. Is there anyone more out of touch than that woman? Is that woman the perfect physical embodiment of the problem in America? Yes. How do people like that take charge of our country? The least impressive, the dumbest, the most reactionary, the people who live in the tiniest little worlds, they run everything. People who drink Bud Light are not impressed, is the truth. John Rich is one of them. He is, of course, a famous singer-songwriter, a country star. He joins us tonight with his thoughts on Bud Light going trans. Jonathan, I appreciate your coming on tonight. What do you make of this?
Well, you know, there's a lot of smart, really high-paid people, Tucker, that sit around big conference tables at all the major brands, and they spend millions and millions and millions of dollars to market their product to do what? To sell more of it, whether it's beer or country music or a pickup truck or pretty much anything you can think of. And it's their right to market it however they want. They're making a bet that this is going to sell more product. And so, you know, I'm also in this world. You know, I sell music. Redneck Riviera is a brand of mine that's nationwide. I keep it real simple. I go God, family, and country. If you love God, family, and country, you'll probably love Redneck Riviera, and it probably won't disappoint you. And what's happening, Tucker, is people that have been loyal to brands for decades and decades are finding it hard to stay loyal to them. And so they start hunting down other brands that they can go support. And there's tons of up-and-coming American brands out there that people are flooding to right now, kind of like mine.
So you really got to hope, and it's not even owned by the Bush family anymore, but that Bud Light fails over this. I mean, I don't want to be mean. I don't want to root for bankruptcy, but in this case, I think we have to hope for that.
I think the customers decide. Customers are king. So I own a bar downtown in Nashville called Redneck Riviera, and our #1 selling beer up until a few days ago was, guess what? Bud Light. That was the #1 beer. We got cases and cases and cases of it sitting back there. But in the past several days, you're hard-pressed to find anybody ordering one. So as the business owner, I just go, hey, if you guys aren't going to order it, we got to put something else in here. And at the end of the day, that's capitalism, right, Tucker? That's how it works.
That's right. And they make great targets. You hit a Bud Light at 50 yards with a .223 and it just explodes. So I recommend that strongly. John Rich, great to see you tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So central bank digital currency really is the end of personal autonomy. The government controls everything. Clearly, they're coming, and a new announcement makes that very obvious. Tulsi Gabbard next. If the government were ever to digitize currency, your freedoms would evaporate. They could zero out your bank account and make you impoverished for being disobedient. You would be a serf at best. And with that in mind, you should know that central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, are about to become the norm in Europe. The president of the European Central Bank, Christine Lagarde, has just said that Europeans will not be able to use more than $1,000 in cash anymore.
Now we have in Europe this threshold. Above 1,000 euros, you cannot pay cash. If you do, you are on the gray market. So you take your risk. You get caught, you are fined, or you go in jail.
So you go to jail for spending your own money if they don't control it. That's coming here. Tulsi Gabbard has spoken out against it. She, of course, ran for president, served in the House from Hawaii, and joins us now. Congressman, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, Tucker.
This is so dystopian, you'd hate to think it could ever come here. You think it might?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is just the latest effort by those in power in our country who are intent on undermining and taking away our own freedoms and liberties. This central bank digital currency is about government-sanctioned surveillance and control. It's about them being able to keep track of every single thing that we purchase, whether it's a stick of gum or an automobile or anything in between. And so if they have all this information and data, which they will in this system, then where does that lead? It gives them the power to decide, okay, well, hey, we don't want to allow you to purchase certain things, or we may deem it necessary to freeze your overall account. This power and what they can do with it, it's not something we have to imagine. We've already seen how Democrats in Congress, Elizabeth Warren and others, are pressuring credit card companies to code and keep track of any purchase that's made at a store that sells firearms. Why? So that these private companies can then say, hey, this person is purchasing, I don't know what they deem is kind of the threshold, but they will then report that as suspicious activity to law enforcement and then expect law enforcement to take action and go after the purchases, legal purchases that a private person made. So this all comes back to how you open this. Once we give up our economic autonomy, we no longer have freedom. Once we allow someone else to control our wallet, they then control our freedom.
Do you think people understand what this means? It'll be sold, as always, as an effort to push back against terrorism or international financiers or crime or whatever, but do people understand on a gut level what could be coming?
I don't think they do, and it's understandable, because if you listen to what the government is telling us, like with all of these other things, whether it's the Patriot Act or the Restrict Act, they're doing the very same thing with this, saying, hey, this is for your own good. This is for your convenience, to make it easier for you to conduct transactions, when in fact they are giving themselves all of the power, taking it away from us, undermining our God-given rights and freedoms in the Constitution, because they want to be able to control us. They want to be able to control we the people.
So nicely put. Tulsi Gabbard joining us tonight. Thank you so much for that.
Thanks, Tucker.
So the nightmare for generations was that our opponents would align against us. And under Joe Biden, in 2 years, that's happened. Saudi Arabia, Russia, Turkey, now all moving toward China. Now France. France. Can NATO survive this? No, it can't. Details ahead. They're always telling you that Republicans are going to alienate the rest of the world. Well, it took just 2 years, but Joe Biden has made our main strategic adversary, China, far stronger than it's ever been. The decision to engage in a war with Russia, American soldiers are in Ukraine fighting Russia right now, has done that. Sanctions against Moscow undermined the dollar's status as the safest currency in the world. No one wants dollars if the U.S. government can just seize them if you displease their political leadership. So it's not surprising that in recent months, Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia have all announced plans to use Chinese currency instead of the dollar. Now even our closest 100-year-long allies are taking off, leaving us. The president of France, Emmanuel Macron, just spent 3 days in China. When he was there, he said that, quote, one of the great risks that Europe faces is getting, quote, caught up in crises that are not ours, which prevents it from building its strategic autonomy. So the war in Ukraine has nothing to do with France, even though it's on the same continent. Instead, Macron said, Europe should work toward becoming a third superpower instead of following the U.S. So here's the president of France more or less green-lighting Chinese aggression against Taiwan and pledging to work with China instead of the U.S. France is a NATO member. How can NATO survive? It's not going to survive. Add to the list of the many things he's broken. Joe Biden will have destroyed NATO, too. Amazing. Why doesn't anyone say that? We're grateful that you watched tonight. We'll be back tomorrow. We're interviewing Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago. That'll air 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Have the best night with the ones you love. We'll see you tomorrow.
All right,
Sean Hannity, ladies and gentlemen.
That's Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. In a minute, we're going to bring you the rest of our conversation with Elon Musk. We showed you some last night. Tonight, his views on the state of the American economy. That's a topic that many Americans